Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything.
You're a wizard, Harry.
I read that line before I ever heard it. Millions of people did, on a printed page, ink on paper, no accent, no gravel in the voice, just the words. But when Robbie Coltrane said it in 2001 in the first Harry Potter movie, in that hut by the sea, rain hammering the boards, a lantern swinging overhead, something shifted. The line stopped belonging only to a book. It became sound and tone, authority, comfort. It became a brand. Coltrane's voice did something subtle but critical. It grounded the world. It made the absurd feel safe. If Hagrid believed it, you could too. And that matters more than it sounds. Because franchises don't scale on plot alone. They scale on trust, on casting decisions that feel inevitable in hindsight and maybe sometimes risky in the moment. Before there were theme parks in Orlando or licensing deals with Warner Brothers, before it was all turned into global distribution systems, even before merchandise aisles and a streaming leverage, there was just a character, delivered convincingly. That actor, Robbie Coltrane, was born on March 30th, 1950. Now, he didn't invent the wizarding world, but he helped build an empire that would eventually grow larger than the person who did invent the wizarding world. But at what point does a story stop belonging to its creator? When does intellectual property become institutional level rather than individual? And how does casting become capital allocation in a franchise economy? To answer all of that, we have to go back to a birth date on March 30th, 1950. From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, March 30th, that story takes us to 1950, the birth behind an empire that outlived its creator. When Robbie Coltrane was born in Rutherglen, Scotland on March 30th, 1950, there was no wizarding world waiting for him. There was no franchise model, no global licensing strategy, no billion-dollar theme park real estate dedicated to butter beer and broomsticks. There was just a child born into post-war Britain. Fast forward nearly half a century. In 1997, a small London publishing house called Bloomsbury Publishing took a chance on a manuscript by a then-unknown author named J.K. Rowling. The first print run of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was modest, a few hundred hardcover copies. The bet was pretty small, but the response? It wasn't. By the time the fourth book released in 2000, midnight launch parties were normal. Global translation rights were accelerating, film rights had already been secured by Warner Brothers, and a long-term Horizon deal that recognized something rare. This wasn't just a book series. It was an expandable world. And expandable worlds, those are assets. But assets only compound if audiences trust the transition. Adapting beloved text into film is financial risk disguised as entertainment. Get the tone wrong and the publishing machine slows. Get the casting wrong and the franchise fractures. When Coltrane was cast as Hagrid, it wasn't nostalgia, it was positioning. Hagrid is the first emotional bridge into the magical world. He is safety. He is authority. He's warmth. If audiences don't believe him, the entire franchise destabilizes at the beginning of the movie. That's not performance, that's capital allocation. By 2001, when Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone premiered, the foundation of a multi-platform ecosystem had been laid. Publishing, film, licensing, merchandising, but none of it works without durability. And durability in franchise economics is built one decision at a time regardless of the sometimes stupid mistakes made along the way.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Is this tree good for climbing? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Once the first film succeeded, the economics changed. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone grossed nearly $1 billion worldwide. That wasn't just box office win, it was proof of transferability. The story worked outside the written page, and that matters. Publishing revenue is finite. Film revenue compounds, but licensing revenue, as we've talked about on this podcast many times, that can really scale up a project. Warner Brothers didn't treat Harry Potter as a single movie property. It treated it as that word that I mention so often, infrastructure. Long-term contracts locked in principal actors for multiple films. Merchandising rights were structured early. International distribution pipelines were synchronized. This was franchise planning, not sequel optimization. Then came the next layer. In 2010, Universal Parks and Resorts opened the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in Orlando. Butterbeer was not just a novelty drink, it was a margin item. Wand replicas weren't just souvenirs, they were recurring revenue. Theme park land is not storytelling, it's real estate backed by narrative equity. And by that point, the books had sold more than 400 million copies globally. The film franchise would eventually surpass $7 billion in box office revenue. Merchandise, licensing, digital distribution, streaming leverage, and park attendance multiplied that footprint. At some point, in this compounding cycle, something subtle happens. The asset stops being fragile. It stops depending on the personality of its creator. It becomes institutional, and institutions behave differently than individuals.
As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
That's what we were taught, service before self.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
Hear that? That's the sound of your life. Perfectly imperfect. Beating in rhythm to the world you've created. But every time you drive after drinking, the music gets drowned out. Your life sounds pretty great. Don't let a buzz ruin it. Buzz driving is drunk driving. Don't drive buzzed. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
In the late 2010s and early 2020s, public controversy surrounding J.K. Rowling intensified. Her public statement and essays regarding sex and gender identity, particularly her views on transgender issues, drew significant backlash. Some readers and actors associated with the franchise publicly disagreed with her. Calls for boycotts circulated, social media amplified that divide. This tension sat alongside an earlier dimension of her authorship. Rowling had publicly stated that characters such as Albus Dumbledore were gay, and later confirmed that characters including Gellert Grindelwald were part of same-sex relationships within the extended canon. Those declarations were widely discussed and, in many cases, celebrated. The brand, in other words, had already expanded beyond the printed page into public interpretation and evolving cultural context. For many franchises, this kind of reputational turbulence would trigger measurable collapse. But the Harry Potter ecosystem didn't disappear. Negotiations about streaming rights continued, video game development proceeded, including 2023's Hogwarts Legacy, which generated over $1 billion in revenue in its first year. Theme parks remained full, new editions of the book continued selling, licensing agreements held. This doesn't erase the controversy, but it demonstrates what's called structural insulation. When intellectual property becomes diversified across corporations and platforms and geographies and generations, it no longer rests on one voice. It rests on contracts and supply chains and real estate and distribution deals and audience nostalgia that renews itself every school year. This is the difference between creator-driven art and institutional intellectual property. Robbie Coltrane didn't design the contracts. He didn't negotiate the licensing. He didn't architect the theme parks. But when he delivered a single line in 2001, he helped anchor audience trust in a world that would outlive its author's cultural moment. The empire he helped humanize would grow large enough to withstand the storms of its own origin. Because once intellectual property becomes infrastructure, it no longer belongs to one person. It belongs to the system built around it. And all of that began when Robbie Coltrane was born on March 30th, 1950. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business better without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.